I'm going to be showing you how to build a budget PC that works well. First off, you're going to need the key components of a computer, which are a CPU, a GPU, a motherboard, RAM, memory, a power supply, and a computer case. First off, with our CPU and GPU. This right here is a Ryzen 5 3400G. This is a CPU that comes with integrated GPU, also known as a graphics card. So we're going with an integrated graphics card because this is a budget build. If you have a bit more money, you could probably go for a dedicated graphics card, which is separate. But since this is a budget build, we're going with integrated. Next up, you're going to need a motherboard. Right here, I have a Gigabyte motherboard. So before you buy a motherboard, you need to make sure it's compatible with your CPU. One way to know if it's compatible is first off by checking if it's a Ryzen or an Intel. Intel is another line of CPUs that you've probably heard of. But you should always make sure that your motherboard is compatible with your CPU or your computer will not work. Next up, we have RAM. Right here I have 2 sticks of 4 GB each of RAM. Most professionals would use 2 sticks because it increases your performance slightly. But it's your preference. You could use 1 or 2. Some motherboards will have 2 slots for RAM. Some will have 4. But you should always make sure if you're planning on buying more than 2 sticks. So here I have 8 GB total. You could always go with more or less if you'd like. 4 GB is the bare minimum. Most motherboards go up to 64 GB. Next up, we have memory. Here I have 512 gigabytes of memory in a solid state drive, also known as an SSD. So this brand is Inland Premium. Other brands might include Samsung or Adata. Next up, we have our power supply. Right here is an EVGA 500 watt 80 plus certified power supply. You should always make sure your power supply is 80 plus certified. You should make sure of that so that in the future your computer will not overheat and break. The last thing you'll need is a computer case. Right here we have a Lian Li computer case. This comes with 3 fans in the front. You should always have at least 1 or 2 fans when buying a case. This case was a little bit more expensive than what you would usually go for. This case was $90, but there are a lot of good cases that are $60 and $50. So the prices for all of these, I already said the computer case was $90. The CPU was $130. The motherboard was $73. The RAM was $45. The SSD was also $45, and the power supply was $55. It's really easy to make a computer. There are only 6 key things you will need: a CPU, a motherboard, RAM, a SSD, a power supply, and a computer case. Here is a close-up view of our CPU and cooler. This cooler comes with pre-applied thermal paste. Next up, here's a close-up view of our motherboard. Here is where the RAM slots will go. And here is where the CPU and cooler will go. Next up, along with the motherboard, there is a network card, a display card, a sound card, and the USB 3. Next up, we have a close-up of a RAM stick, and a close-up of the SSD and the power supply. And here is an open view of the computer case. Right here is where the motherboard will go. Right here is where the SSD will go. And right here is where the power supply will go. Now I'm going to put the CPU into the motherboard slot. So right here, first what you need to do is lift up this lever and take your CPU and find the little triangle and match it up with the one on the motherboard and gently just let it slide in, and then carefully close this up, and there you go. Now you have inserted your CPU into your motherboard. Next up, we're going to place our fan over our CPU. But before we can do that, we need to first unscrew these brackets right here because they are for a different model fan. Next, we carefully place this and keep it even with where the screw should go and start screwing this in. Now I'm evenly tightening the screws right here so that the thermal paste spreads evenly on the CPU. I'm going to plug in this fan in this slot right here. Next step is placing the RAM in the motherboard. Here I have put in 2 sticks of RAM in slots 1 and 3. Before you put it in, you should always check with your motherboard's manual and any notes that come with your RAM to make sure you're putting it in the right slot. Next up, we're going to place the motherboard into the computer case. The easiest way to do this is by putting the computer case on its side and opening it up and placing the motherboard inside the standoffs that are going to be shown. Now I have placed the motherboard inside the case on the standoffs, making sure that all these ports are even with the shield. And now I'm going to screw it in. We have now connected our SSD and power supply. Right here we have our SSD. Right here we have our power supply. And these two, they connect right here for the SSD. And right here and here for our power supply. Right in this corner, we have an audio cable from our computer case. And right here, we have 4 very small cables that are for the LED, for the power, and for the reset switches. Now I have connected my computer to power. And look at these beautiful RGB lights. So what I did was I used a USB and created a boot drive so that I can install Windows. And here I've connected a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse, and I have Windows installed. I have just finished my first computer, Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this inspires you to build your own computer. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me at matthew.parmbin@gmail.com.